The cruelest betrayals are never written by fate. They are signed by the hands of those who once promised to love you. The moon hall of Briar Crown shimmered beneath hundreds of crystal lanterns, their silver glow spilling across polished marble like frozen moonlight. Every noble family, every alpha elder, and every respected council member had gathered beneath the soaring stone arches for what was meant to be a celebration of legacy. Instead, Avellini Briarwood stood alone in the center of the great chamber, while silence settled over the crowd with the weight of an approaching storm. Ever since she was a little girl, she had imagined this ceremony differently. She had pictured warm smiles, blessings from the elders, and hopeful whispers about the family she and Corwin Blackmore would one day build together. Instead, all she heard now was the quiet rustle of expensive cloaks and the faint murmur of voices already deciding her future before she had spoken a single word. Elder Hawthorne slowly broke the silver seal upon an ancient parchment and lifted it toward the gathering. His weathered face carried no anger, no kindness, only the detached certainty of a man delivering what tradition demanded. After repeated examinations conducted under the authority of the council healers, he declared, his steady voice echoing through the magnificent hall, Avellini Briarwood has been found unable to bear an heir for House Blackmore. The words drifted through the chamber like winter frost. No one protested. A few nobles lowered their eyes. Others quietly exchanged knowing glances, as though an old rumor had finally become official truth. Avellini felt every heartbeat echo inside her chest. Questions filled her mind, but years of respecting tradition held them prisoner behind silent lips. Across the chamber stood Corwin Blackmore, the alpha who had once promised beneath a full moon that they would face every season of life together. He did not look at her. Instead, his attention remained fixed upon the council table where several formal contracts rested beside an untouched silver pen. His father stepped forward before anyone else could speak. The Blackmore bloodline cannot risk losing its future, the older alpha announced firmly. House Holloway has agreed to strengthen our alliance through marriage, ensuring heirs for generations to come. Alliance, legacy, bloodline. Beautiful words that somehow managed to disguise heartbreak. Avellini slowly turned toward Corwin, desperately searching for even the smallest sign of hesitation. She remembered the young man who had once laughed beside quiet rivers, who had gathered wildflowers simply because they reminded him of her smile, who had promised that nothing would ever matter more than the life they dreamed of building together. That young man seemed impossibly distant now. Corwin finally spoke, though he never truly met her eyes. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "The pack needs an heir." The words struck harder than any accusation ever could because they sounded rehearsed, repeated so many times that they no longer belonged to his heart. Elder Hawthorne unfolded another parchment. By agreement between House Blackmore and the Northern Border Authority, Lady Avellini Briarwood will be transferred under formal protection in exchange for military cooperation, seasonal grain support, and renewed territorial agreements. Transferred. Not honored. Not welcomed. Not remembered. Simply transferred, as though the value of an entire life could be measured beside shipments of grain and political convenience. Avellini clasped her trembling hands together before anyone noticed. She refused to let the hall remember her tears. Around her, whispered conversations quietly resumed. Some pitied her. Others approved of the decision. A few young Omegas deliberately looked away, afraid that witnessing another woman's misfortune might somehow invite their own. Only an elderly servant standing near one of the marble pillars offered her a gentle nod filled with silent compassion. Avellini answered with the faintest smile before lifting her chin. If this gathering intended to remember her, it would not be as someone begging to remain where she was no longer wanted. The silver pen finally touched parchment. Corwin signed away the future they had once imagined together. The soft scratch of ink across paper echoed louder inside Avellini than every ceremonial horn that had ever sounded through Briar Crown. Moments later, attendants approached carrying a simple traveling cloak. No one called what was happening in exile. No one called it abandonment. Tradition wrapped itself around injustice until it almost looked respectable. Outside, steady rain had begun falling across the palace courtyard. Cold drops slid from ancient stone statues before disappearing into the dark earth below. Avellini stepped into the storm without looking back. Waiting beyond the gates stood a plain carriage bearing no family crest, only two iron lanterns swaying gently beneath the wind. Her single travel chest rested beside the driver. Everything she had once believed permanent now fit inside one weathered wooden trunk. As the horses began moving, Briar Crown slowly disappeared behind a curtain of silver rain. She watched until the highest towers dissolved into mist. She whispered no farewell because there was nothing left worth saying. Far above the winding mountain road, hidden beneath towering pines overlooking the valley, another traveler watched the lonely carriage disappear into the distance. A long black cloak concealed his broad shoulders while rain rolled unnoticed from dark leather boots planted firmly upon the rocky hillside. Beside him stood an enormous silver wolf, perfectly still, its sharp eyes fixed upon the departing carriage. The stranger's gaze never left the solitary figure seated behind the rain-covered window. So, he murmured quietly, almost as though speaking to the wind itself, they cast away a woman they never truly understood. The great wolf lifted its head, its ears turning toward the distant road as though recognizing something invisible beyond ordinary sight. The traveler remained silent for another long moment before turning toward the forest path. His silver eyes reflected neither pity nor curiosity. They carried only quiet certainty, as if destiny had just revealed the first page of a story the kingdom was never meant to rewrite. The rain continued long after Briar Crown disappeared behind the mountains, each steady drop washing another memory from the carriage window until only blurred outlines remained. Avellini Briarwood sat quietly with her weathered travel chest beside her, listening to the rhythmic sound of wooden wheels rolling across the uneven road. The silence inside the carriage no longer felt cruel. It felt empty, as though her old life had already ended while the next had not yet begun. The elderly driver rarely spoke, offering only an occasional reassuring glance whenever the mountain roads became narrow. By early afternoon, the clouds slowly began to break apart, allowing thin streams of sunlight to reach the forest below. When they arrived beside a crystal-clear creek winding through ancient pines, the driver gently brought the horses to a halt. "We will stop here for a few minutes," he said kindly. "Fresh water will do all of us some good." Grateful for the chance to breathe outside the cramped carriage, Avellini stepped onto the soft forest floor. Cool mountain air filled her lungs, carrying the scent of cedar, moss, and distant wildflowers. She wandered slowly toward the flowing creek where smooth stones shimmered beneath the clear water. For the first time since leaving Briar Crown, no one was watching her with pity. No counsel waited to judge her. No whispered conversations followed her footsteps. The quiet wilderness simply accepted her presence without asking who she had once been. Then a faint whimper drifted through the trees. It came again, barely louder than the moving water. Avellini immediately followed the sound until she discovered a small silver wolf pup trapped beneath a fallen branch tangled with thick vines. The frightened little creature struggled only enough to reveal its fear before freezing completely when it noticed her. Avellini slowly knelt several feet away, careful not to frighten it further. "Easy," she whispered gently. "No one is going to hurt you." The tiny wolf watched her with wide silver eyes, but did not attempt to bite or run. Moving one careful branch at a time, Avellini gradually freed its injured paw. Once the final branch rolled away, the little wolf remained perfectly still, uncertain whether it could trust the stranger before it. Avellini smiled softly. "You are free now. The rest is your choice." The pup cautiously stepped forward, lowered its nose toward her outstretched hand, and gently brushed her fingertips before giving a tiny wag of its tail. A quiet laugh escaped Avellini's lips, surprising even herself. It had been many days since she had smiled without forcing it. Moments later, the little wolf trotted several steps into the trees before stopping once more. It looked back toward her, then lifted its nose toward the rocky ridge overlooking the valley, almost as though sensing another familiar presence hidden beyond the forest. With one final glance, it disappeared among the pines. High above the creek, concealed behind towering evergreens, Ridian Vale lowered the brass field glass from his eyes. Beside him stood Alaric Ashbourne, his dark traveling cloak blending almost perfectly with the shadows beneath the trees. The Alpha King watched the forest path in thoughtful silence. That pup belongs to one of the northern packs, Rydian observed quietly. It trusts almost no one outside its own family. Alaric's eyes remained fixed on the place where Avalini still knelt beside the fallen branch. Yet it trusted her. Rydian nodded thoughtfully. She helped because she believed no one was watching. Alaric folded his arms. That is when character reveals itself most honestly. Before either man spoke again, two traveling merchants leading pack horses entered the road beside the waiting carriage. One looked toward Avalini with sudden recognition. "Is that not the woman from House Briarwood?" he asked quietly. His companion frowned. "The Omega who was traded away?" The older merchant sighed. "That is the story. They said she could never give her Alpha an heir." The words reached Avalini clearly across the quiet clearing. For the briefest moment sadness flickered across her face, but she neither defended herself nor corrected the rumor. She simply thanked the driver for waiting and climbed back into the carriage with the same quiet dignity she had carried out of Briar Crown. Watching from the ridge above, Rydian shook his head. People repeat rumors as though they were facts. Alaric continued watching the slowly departing carriage until it disappeared around the bend. "Rumors rarely begin by accident," he said at last. "Someone gains something every time a lie becomes easier to believe than the truth." Rydian turned toward him. "Do you want me to investigate?" Alaric answered without hesitation. "Begin with the council archives. Find the original examination records, every physician involved, and every document connected to Lady Avalini Briarwood." Rydian studied the king's expression for a moment before smiling faintly. "You already believe the verdict was false." Alaric looked once more toward the distant road where the carriage had vanished beyond the trees. "I believe a woman who shows compassion when she believes no one is watching deserves more than a rumor deciding the rest of her life." As sunlight finally broke through the retreating storm clouds, the narrow mountain road stretched toward the northern border like a ribbon of quiet promise. Inside the carriage, Avalini believed she was traveling farther away from her future with every passing mile. She never imagined that, somewhere behind her, a king had already begun searching not for reasons to judge her, but for the truth that others had worked so hard to bury. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of pale silver, and the kingdom she had once called home was already little more than a memory hidden behind layers of mist. Avalini Briarwood sat quietly inside the modest carriage, her hands folded over the weathered leather satchel resting on her lap. Every mile carried her farther from Briar Crown, yet the silence inside her heart remained heavier than the road stretching ahead. The elderly driver guided the horses along a winding mountain pass, where towering pines guarded the cliffs like ancient sentinels. By midday, he slowed the carriage beside a clear stream flowing through smooth granite stones. "The horses deserve a few minutes," he said kindly. "So do you." Avalini thanked him with a gentle nod before stepping into the cool mountain air. She wandered toward the water, letting the crisp scent of cedar and fresh moss replace the stale memories that still lingered in her thoughts. The stream moved without hesitation, slipping around every obstacle in its path, and she found herself wondering whether life could ever learn to do the same. A faint rustling sound interrupted the peaceful moment. She turned toward a thicket of ferns where something small struggled beneath a tangle of broken branches. Moving carefully so she would not frighten it, Avalini knelt beside the brush and discovered a young silver wolf with one paw trapped beneath a fallen limb. Its bright eyes watched her with equal parts fear and curiosity. She did not reach for it immediately. Instead, she lowered herself onto the damp earth and spoke as though comforting a frightened child. "You do not know me," she whispered. "That makes us alike." The little wolf stopped struggling. After several quiet moments, Avalini carefully lifted the branch, allowing the frightened animal to ease its paw free. Rather than fleeing, it remained where it was, studying her face with surprising calm. She smiled for the first time in days. "There you go," she murmured. "No one should remain trapped simply because no one stopped to help." The wolf gently touched its nose against her fingertips before trotting a few steps away. Then, instead of disappearing into the trees, it looked back over its shoulder as though inviting her to follow. Avalini laughed softly but shook her head. "I think your family is waiting for you." With one final glance, the young wolf vanished into the forest. Hidden high upon a rocky overlook, Another silver wolf watched the entire exchange before quietly turning toward the man standing beside him. Rydian lowered the field glass in his hand and smiled faintly. That little rascal has never trusted strangers. Beside him, Alaric Ashbourne remained silent, his gaze following Avalini as she brushed the dirt from her skirts before returning toward the stream. She expected nothing in return, Rydian observed. Most people would have hurried back to the road. Alaric folded his arms thoughtfully. Character reveals itself most clearly when no one believes they are being watched. Before either man spoke again, voices drifted upward from the trail below. Two traders leading heavily loaded pack horses had stopped beside the carriage after recognizing the crest that had once belonged to House Briarwood. One of them glanced toward Avalini and quietly said, "That is the woman everyone has been talking about." His companion frowned. "The one who could not give her Alpha an heir? That is what I heard." The first trader shrugged. "A pity. Some lives are decided before they truly begin." Avalini heard every word as she approached the carriage. Pain flickered across her face for only an instant before she calmly thanked the driver for waiting and climbed back inside without offering any defense. Watching from above, Rydian shook his head. Rumors travel faster than truth. Alaric continued looking toward the slowly departing carriage. Rumors always begin with someone who benefits from them. He remained quiet for another moment before turning away from the overlook. "Find the first council record." Rydian looked surprised. "You believe this began long before yesterday?" Alaric nodded once. "A verdict like that is never created by a single conversation. Someone built it piece by piece." As the carriage disappeared around the next bend, sunlight finally broke through the clouds, spilling across the winding road ahead. Avalini watched the bright ribbon of light stretching into the mountains without realizing that somewhere behind her, a king had stopped asking whether the rumors were true and had begun asking who had wanted the kingdom to believe them. The following morning arrived wrapped in golden sunlight, and for the first time since leaving Briar Crown, Avalini Briarwood woke to the sound of birds instead of whispered judgment. The little room above Maeve Hollis's inn overlooked the quiet village square where merchants were already arranging baskets of apples, fresh bread, and hand-woven blankets beneath colorful awnings. Children hurried toward the small schoolhouse, while neighbors greeted one another with easy smiles that carried no hidden expectations. Avalini stood beside the window for a long moment, quietly wondering how such an ordinary place could feel more peaceful than every magnificent hall she had ever known. After helping Maeve prepare breakfast for several elderly guests, she carried a basket of warm bread across the village toward a small stone cottage covered with climbing ivy. The villagers had spoken often about Mother Isolde Rowan, an elderly healer whose wisdom was respected throughout the northern border territory. When Avalini knocked softly upon the weathered wooden door, the older woman welcomed her with a warm smile that somehow felt familiar, as though kindness itself had opened the door. "Come in, my dear," Mother Isolde said gently. "Maeve told me you might visit." The cottage smelled of dried lavender, cedar, and fresh herbs hanging from sturdy ceiling beams. Shelves filled with carefully labeled jars surrounded a large wooden table where old medical journals rested beside polished stone bowls. Nothing about the room felt grand, yet every corner reflected decades of quiet service. As they shared warm herbal tea together, Mother Isolde watched Avalini with thoughtful eyes. "You carry yourself like someone who has spent many years apologizing for something that was never truly your fault," she observed softly. Avalini lowered her eyes toward the steaming cup. "I believe the council made its decision for a reason." "Belief," Mother Isolde replied, "is strongest when it is built upon truth." She gently reached across the table. "May I examine you?" Avalini nodded without hesitation. She had nothing left to lose. The examination was careful, respectful, and unhurried. Mother Isolde asked simple questions, listened patiently, and repeated several traditional methods that had been practiced by healers long before politics found its way into medicine. When she finally finished, the older woman's peaceful expression slowly gave way to quiet concern. She reached for one of her oldest journals and carefully turned several fragile pages before repeating part of the examination once more. The result remained unchanged. She looked directly into Avalini's eyes. "Tell me exactly what they told you in Briar Crown." Avalini repeated every detail she could remember. The council healers had declared she would never bear an heir. No second opinion had been offered. No explanation had ever been provided beyond the official verdict. When the story ended, Mother Isolde closed her journal with unusual firmness. "No," she whispered. Avellini blinked in confusion. "No, there is nothing before me that supports what they declared." Silence settled between them. Even the cheerful birds outside seemed to disappear for a moment. "I have examined women for more than 40 years, Mother Isolde continued quietly. If your body carried the condition they described, I would recognize it immediately." Avellini stared at her, scarcely able to breathe. Then they were wrong. The older healer chose her next words with great care. Either they made an extraordinary mistake. She paused before meeting Avellini's eyes once again. Or someone wanted everyone to believe a lie. Those words echoed inside Avellini long after they were spoken. Every memory from Briar Crown suddenly felt different. The hurried examinations, the unanswered questions, Corwin's growing distance, the council's eagerness to finalize the agreement with House Holloway. Pieces that had never seemed connected now quietly formed a pattern she had been too trusting to recognize. Tears gathered in her eyes, not because she finally had hope, but because she realized how easily hope had been taken away. Mother Isolde gently rested one hand over hers. "Do not let anger become the first thing you carry after discovering the truth," she said softly. "Carry wisdom instead. It will take you farther." At that same hour, inside the village council office, Ridian Vale quietly unfolded several reports gathered from Ashen Hollow during the previous 2 days. Alaric Ashbourne stood beside the open window overlooking the square while morning sunlight stretched across the wooden floor. 3 healers signed the original declaration, Ridian reported. Yet only one examination record remains complete. Several pages have disappeared from the archive. Alaric remained silent. Ridian continued. "There is something else. According to the records, Corwin Blackmore was never fully examined before the council reached its decision." Alaric slowly turned toward him. "Never." Ridian shook his head. "No complete report exists." A thoughtful silence filled the room. "Then they reached a conclusion after examining only one person," Alaric said quietly. Ridian nodded once. "That is exactly what the documents suggest." Alaric walked toward the window, watching villagers move peacefully through the square below. Somewhere among them, Avellini was likely returning from Mother Isolde's cottage, unaware that the evidence surrounding her past had begun unraveling piece by piece. "Continue gathering records," Alaric instructed calmly. Quietly, "I do not want anyone in Briar Crown realizing we are asking questions." Ridian smiled faintly. "You believe the truth is finally close." Alaric looked toward the distant mountains where Briar Crown lay hidden beyond countless forests and valleys. "No," he answered with quiet certainty. "I believe someone has spent years making sure the truth never reached the light. Now that light has finally begun searching for them." Several days passed beneath calm autumn skies, yet the quiet life of Avellini Briarwood had begun building inside the northern border territory never truly silenced the questions lingering within her heart. Every morning, she helped Maeve Hollis prepare fresh bread before sunrise, delivered warm meals to elderly neighbors, and spent peaceful afternoons assisting Mother Isolde Rowan with herbs gathered from the surrounding hills. The simple rhythm of village life slowly eased the wounds left by Briar Crown, but every evening, when the last lanterns glowed across the square, she found herself wondering why fate had brought her so far from everything she had once believed would last forever. One crisp morning, the peaceful routine came to an unexpected halt. The distant sound of polished horseshoes echoed through the valley long before anyone saw the royal procession emerging from the mountain road. Villagers stepped outside their homes while merchants paused in the middle of arranging their stalls. Children hurried toward the square, whispering excitedly as banners bearing the silver crest of the crown appeared between the rows of maple trees. The captain of the royal escort dismounted with practiced precision before accepting an ivory scroll from one of his attendants. Breaking the black wax seal, he read aloud in a voice clear enough for the entire square to hear. "By command of His Majesty, Alaric Ashbourne, Alpha King of the Northern Kingdom, a royal assembly shall convene at Silver Summit Hall in 7 days. Territorial leaders, council elders, senior healers, and selected witnesses are required to attend." Curious whispers spread immediately. A royal assembly had not been called in many years except during matters affecting the future of the kingdom itself. One by one, the captain continued reading the names written upon the decree. Village officials answered respectfully. Mother Isolde Rowan stepped forward with quiet dignity. Then came another name that seemed impossible. Lady Avellini Briarwood. The square fell completely silent. Avellini instinctively looked around, convinced another woman must surely share her name. There has been some misunderstanding, she said softly. The captain met her gaze with complete certainty before presenting the sealed invitation. There is no misunderstanding, my lady. Your presence has been personally requested by the crown. Avellini accepted the parchment with trembling fingers. The silver seal remained untouched, yet she already felt the weight of questions pressing against her thoughts. Why would the Alpha King summon someone who held no title, no influence, and no place within the kingdom's political affairs? Mother Isolde stepped beside her and smiled gently. Sometimes truth needs every witness standing in the same room before it is willing to reveal itself. Those words remained with Avellini long after the royal escort departed. High above the village, inside a modest council chamber overlooking the valley, Ridian Vale carefully organized a growing collection of recovered records across a wide oak table. Missing examination reports, forgotten physician journals, and sworn statements from retired clerks now formed a trail that pointed toward the same troubling conclusion. Alaric Ashbourne quietly studied every page without speaking. Finally, Ridian broke the silence. We have enough evidence to expose serious failures in the original investigation. Alaric slowly closed the final journal. Enough to begin, he answered. Not enough to finish. Ridian looked puzzled. The physicians agree. Mother Isolde agrees. The records contradict one another. Why not announce the findings immediately? Alaric walked toward the window overlooking the village below, where Avellini stood speaking with Maeve beside the bakery. Because truth deserves more than a private conversation. He paused before continuing. If I speak today, some will claim the crown acted too quickly. Others will insist evidence was hidden from them. He turned back toward Ridian. I want every council elder, every healer, every noble house, and every witness standing together when the truth is revealed. No one will leave that hall claiming they were never given the opportunity to listen. Ridian smiled faintly. You intend to settle this once. Exactly once, Alaric replied. Justice loses its strength when it must defend itself against the same lie again and again. Preparations for the journey began the following morning. Although Avellini insisted she could travel with only her small trunk, nearly the entire village found quiet excuses to help. Maeve filled a basket with fresh bread and dried fruit for the road. Mother Isolde carefully tucked copies of her medical findings into a leather folder before placing it inside Avellini's travel satchel. Facts have a remarkable way of surviving when people are brave enough to carry them, she said with a reassuring smile. Young Finian hurried across the square holding a smooth white stone he had polished beside the creek. For luck, he declared proudly. Avellini accepted the simple gift with grateful eyes, realizing that people who had known her for only a handful of days had shown her more kindness than those who had once promised to stand beside her forever. At sunrise on the 7th day, a royal carriage bearing the silver crest of the crown arrived outside Maeve's Inn. Unlike the plain wagon that had carried her away from Briar Crown, this carriage waited with quiet dignity rather than silent dismissal. As Avellini prepared to board, another procession appeared along the eastern road. Rich banners displaying the Blackmore crest fluttered above polished riders dressed for ceremony. Corwin Blackmore rode at their head beside Vivian Holloway. The moment Corwin recognized Avellini standing beside the royal carriage, uncertainty crossed his face. His eyes lingered upon the silver crest decorating its polished door before slowly lifting toward her. Vivian noticed his hesitation and offered a composed smile. How curious, she remarked lightly. It seems forgotten stories occasionally receive unexpected invitations. Avellini answered neither the remark nor the lingering stares surrounding her. She simply thanked Maeve, embraced Mother Isolde, and stepped into the carriage with quiet confidence. As the royal procession began its journey towards Silver Summit Hall, she watched the village slowly disappear behind the autumn hills. She still did not know why the Alpha King had summoned her. She only knew that, for the first time since leaving Briar Crown, Someone had finally asked her to come and hear the truth instead of quietly accepting a lie. Silver Summit Hall rose above the mountain cliffs like a fortress carved from light itself, its towering white stone walls reflecting the first rays of morning across the valley below. Banners representing every allied territory fluttered in the cool autumn breeze, while elegant carriages continued arriving through the great iron gates one after another. Avellini Briarwood stepped onto the broad marble courtyard with quiet uncertainty, holding the leather folder Mother Isolde Rowan had entrusted to her before leaving the village. Around her, noble families exchanged polished greetings while respected elders and council leaders entered the magnificent hall with practiced confidence. More than once, she noticed curious glances following her across the courtyard. Some recognized her immediately. Others whispered after reading her name upon the official guest register. She ignored every stare. She had spent too many months allowing other people's opinions to define the sound of her own footsteps. Inside the great chamber, royal attendants guided each guest toward carefully assigned seats. When Avellini discovered her place near the front of the assembly, surprise briefly crossed her face. She had not been seated among ordinary witnesses. Neither had she been placed beside the noble houses. Her chair stood alone within a section reserved for individuals directly requested by the crown. Soft murmurs spread through the hall almost immediately. Across the room, Corwin Blackmore entered beside Vivian Holloway. His expression changed the moment he noticed where Avellini had been seated. Confusion quickly replaced certainty. Vivian leaned toward him with a faint smile. Perhaps someone at court enjoys making dramatic gestures. Corwin did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on Avellini as though seeing her for the first time since she had left Briar Crown. Moments later, Mother Isolde Rowan entered carrying her weathered leather satchel. Unlike the richly dressed physicians seated nearby, she wore the same simple gray robes she always had. Yet several royal healers immediately stood to greet her with quiet respect before inviting her to sit beside them. Watching that small exchange reminded Avellini that true wisdom rarely needed expensive clothing to be recognized. A deep ceremonial bell echoed throughout the enormous chamber. Every conversation ended at once. The towering bronze doors behind the royal platform slowly opened, and Alaric Ashbourne entered the hall wearing the formal black coat of the Alpha King, silver embroidery catching the morning light with every measured step. Avellini's breath caught almost instantly. The quiet traveler she had spoken with beside the creek. The thoughtful stranger who had asked gentle questions in the village. The man who had watched without judging. Had been the Alpha King all along. Their eyes met only briefly before Alaric turned toward the assembly. He offered no sign that they had ever spoken, preserving both her dignity and his own. Once everyone had taken their seats, the High Chancellor began presenting reports concerning harvests, trade agreements, and preparations for the coming winter. Nearly an hour passed before Alaric finally rose from the throne. Silence immediately settled across the hall. Our kingdom has always depended upon trust, he began calmly. Not blind trust, but trust strengthened by honesty. His silver eyes slowly moved across every noble family present. When truth is neglected for convenience, even the strongest alliances eventually begin to crumble. No one interrupted. Several weeks ago, Alaric continued. Questions reached the crown concerning official medical findings that altered the course of one citizen's entire life. The atmosphere inside the chamber changed immediately. Corwin straightened in his seat. Vivian folded her hands together more tightly. Avellini felt her heartbeat quicken. Alaric gestured toward the council table. Bring forward the records. Royal attendants carefully placed several sealed journals upon polished oak before the assembled leaders. Rydian Vale stepped forward carrying another collection of recovered documents gathered from Briar Crown during the previous week. One by one, the seals were broken in full view of every witness. The first royal physician adjusted his spectacles before speaking. These are the official reports originally submitted to the crown. He opened the first journal before laying several copied pages beside it. These are the records later recovered from the territorial archive. The differences became obvious almost immediately. Several examination pages were missing. Dates no longer matched. Signatures appeared incomplete. Quiet whispers spread through the hall. A second physician rose from his chair. After reviewing every available document, and conducting an independent medical examination under royal authority, we found no evidence supporting the original conclusion declared against Lady Avellini Briarwood. A stunned silence followed. Avellini closed her eyes for only a heartbeat. She had dreamed of hearing those words countless times, yet nothing had prepared her for the moment they were finally spoken aloud before the entire kingdom. Corwin slowly stood. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said, his voice noticeably less certain than before. "Our council healers examined her for months." Mother Isolde Rowan quietly rose from her seat. "Then they reached a conclusion that none of the evidence before us can support." Her calm voice carried remarkable authority despite its gentleness. She carefully opened her own journal beside the royal records. "I examined Lady Avellini personally. 3 royal physicians repeated those examinations independently. Every result reached the same conclusion." She looked toward the assembled council. "She is healthy." Another physician carefully unfolded one final document. "There is one additional concern." Every eye turned toward him. "The recovered archive contains no complete medical examination for Lord Corwin Blackmore." Confused murmurs instantly filled the hall. An elderly alpha elder frowned deeply. "Both future mates should have been examined." "Correct," the physician answered. Yet only one was. Alaric stepped away from the throne, descending the broad marble steps with slow, deliberate confidence. His gaze rested briefly upon the missing pages scattered across the council table before lifting toward the assembly once again. "Today," he said quietly, "we have not uncovered the entire truth." He paused, allowing every word to settle across the silent chamber. "But we have uncovered enough to know that someone asked this kingdom to accept a verdict before asking the right questions." The chamber became so still that even the mountain wind brushing gently against the stained glass windows sounded louder than the breathing of those waiting to discover what the Alpha King would do next. Silence settled over Silver Summit Hall with a weight no one dared disturb. The missing records remained spread across the council table while every noble, elder, and healer struggled to absorb what had just been revealed. The question was no longer whether mistakes had been made. The question had become what the crown intended to do about them. Alaric Ashbourne allowed the silence to linger. Years of ruling had taught him that truth often carried greater power when people were given time to hear it with their own conscience instead of another person's voice. Finally, he stepped away from the council table and slowly descended the broad marble staircase leading toward the center of the chamber. Every measured step echoed softly beneath the vaulted ceiling. He stopped several feet in front of Corwin Blackmore. The younger Alpha rose respectfully, though uncertainty was now written across every line of his face. Alaric regarded him calmly. "Lord Blackmore," he said, "when your council declared Lady Avellini incapable of bearing an heir, did you ever request an independent examination?" Corwin lowered his eyes. "No, Your Majesty." "Did you ever ask whether the examination had been completed according to royal standards?" Another pause followed. "No." Alaric gave a slow nod. "Did you ever ask whether you should also be examined before allowing another person's future to be decided?" The question lingered throughout the chamber. Corwin remained silent. His silence answered more clearly than words ever could. Alaric did not shame him. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked across the assembly. Too many lives have been altered because questions were never asked. He turned toward the council members seated behind the physicians. Justice does not fail only when lies are spoken. It also fails when truth is accepted without being examined. No one argued. No one could. Every piece of evidence resting upon the council table had already spoken for itself. Alaric slowly crossed the chamber until he stood before Avellini Briarwood. She rose instinctively as he approached, uncertain why the Alpha King himself had stepped away from the throne. Their eyes met for a quiet moment. "Lady Avellini," he said gently, "when your future was decided inside Briar Crown, were you given the opportunity to seek another opinion?" She answered honestly, "No, Your Majesty." "Were you ever shown the complete findings that determined your life?" "No." "Were you allowed to defend yourself before the agreement transferring you from your home was signed?" Avellini felt every memory returning at once. She slowly shook her head. "No." Alaric looked around the great hall. Then this kingdom failed her long before anyone standing in this room realized it. The words settled over the gathering with quiet finality. An elderly alpha lowered his head. Several council members exchanged deeply uncomfortable glances. Mother Isolde Rowan closed her eyes for a brief moment, as though silently thanking the moon goddess that someone had finally spoken what should have been said from the beginning. Alaric remained standing before Avellini. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. For weeks I have watched you without announcing who I was. A ripple of surprise spread through the assembly. Avellini looked at him with quiet astonishment. Alaric continued, I watched you comfort frightened children. I watched you help strangers who could offer you nothing in return. I watched you show kindness to people who knew nothing about your past. He paused before speaking the next words. You believed your kingdom had abandoned you, yet you never allowed that pain to become cruelty toward anyone else. Avellini felt tears gathering in her eyes, but she refused to look away. Alaric's voice remained calm, carrying effortlessly throughout the silent chamber. Many people inherit noble blood. He looked toward the gathered houses. Far fewer possess a noble heart. He turned back to Avellini. The kingdom once treated you as though your worth depended upon your ability to provide an heir. Another brief silence followed. Then came the words every person inside Silver Summit Hall would remember for the rest of their lives. I reject that judgment. The chamber remained perfectly still. Alaric took one final step forward. They chose to let you go. His silver eyes never left Avellini's. Today, I choose you. A quiet gasp moved through the assembly. Corwin stared in stunned disbelief. Vivian's confident expression disappeared completely. Alaric gently extended his hand toward Avellini, not as a command, but as an invitation freely offered. From this day forward, he declared, Lady Avellini Briarwood will stand beneath the direct protection of the crown. No council, no noble house, and no political agreement shall ever again decide her future without her own voice being heard. Avellini hesitated only long enough to steady her breathing before placing her hand in his. The moment their hands met, the morning sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows bathed the marble floor in brilliant shades of silver and gold. No applause broke the silence. None was needed. Every witness understood they had just seen something far greater than a royal decree. They had watched a kingdom restore the dignity it had once taken away. As Alaric stood beside Avellini before the eyes of every allied territory, the ancient ceremonial bells outside Silver Summit Hall began ringing softly across the mountains, announcing not the beginning of another political alliance, but the beginning of a new chapter that no lie would ever be powerful enough to erase. For several long moments after Alaric Ashbourne declared, Today, I choose you, no one inside Silver Summit Hall spoke a single word. The silence itself seemed to carry more weight than applause ever could. Avellini Briarwood remained standing beside him, still trying to understand how a life that had been taken apart one careful decision at a time could begin changing so completely in the span of a single afternoon. Across the chamber, Corwin Blackmore lowered his eyes, not because anyone demanded it, but because the truth now stood before him more clearly than any accusation ever could. Vivian Holloway remained perfectly still, her confident smile having quietly disappeared. The High Chancellor stepped forward carrying another royal decree. By order of the Crown, he announced, all judgments previously issued against Lady Avellini Briarwood concerning her ability to bear children are hereby declared without legal standing. The investigation shall continue until every unanswered question has been fully examined, and every official record shall be corrected accordingly. Several elders nodded in solemn agreement. Others exchanged thoughtful glances, realizing they had witnessed more than the restoration of one woman's reputation. They had witnessed the beginning of a different standard of justice. Alaric looked across the gathered leaders before speaking once more. Today is not about replacing one unfair judgment with another, he said calmly. No kingdom becomes stronger by seeking humiliation. It becomes stronger when truth is finally allowed to stand where fear once stood. His words settled gently throughout the hall. Even those who had once supported the original decision found no reason to disagree. At that moment, the great bronze doors behind the royal platform opened slowly. Every conversation immediately ceased. An elderly woman dressed in flowing silver robes entered the chamber carrying a slender white staff carved with ancient lunar symbols. Her long silver hair rested neatly across her shoulders, and her quiet presence seemed to calm the room before she had spoken a single word. One by one, nobles and elders respectfully rose to their feet. The High Keeper of the Moon Grove had arrived. She stopped before Alaric and inclined her head. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "the grove is ready." Alaric returned the respectful gesture before looking toward the assembly. "Then let every witness come." Together they walked beyond the great hall into the royal gardens overlooking the mountains. Afternoon sunlight drifted across stone pathways lined with white roses, carrying the fragrance of cedar and late summer flowers upon a gentle breeze. At the center of the garden stood the oldest living tree in the kingdom. Its smooth silver trunk reflected the light like polished moonstone, while every branch stretched gracefully toward the sky. Yet despite the beauty surrounding it, not a single blossom rested upon its limbs. The High Keeper approached the ancient tree before quietly turning toward Avellini. "Our ancestors believe this tree cannot be commanded," she said. "It has never answered titles, wealth, or power. If it chooses silence today, that silence changes nothing about the truth already spoken within the hall." Those simple words eased the last uncertainty within Avellini's heart. She slowly stepped forward until she stood before the great tree. For a brief moment, she simply admired its quiet beauty. Then she gently rested her hand against the cool silver bark. Nothing happened. The garden remained completely still. A soft breeze drifted through the surrounding pines before fading again into silence. Several nobles exchanged uncertain glances. One elderly council member quietly folded his hands together. Somewhere near the back of the gathering, someone released a slow breath. Seconds passed. Still nothing. Avellini smiled faintly to herself. She had not come seeking another miracle. The truth had already been enough. She slowly began to withdraw her hand. "Wait," the High Keeper whispered gently. Avellini paused. The entire garden seemed to hold its breath. Even the birds resting among the nearby branches had fallen silent. Then the wind returned. It arrived softly at first, carrying the scent of distant rain across the mountains before swirling gently around the ancient tree. High above, one slender branch trembled almost imperceptibly. A tiny silver bud appeared where only Bear would had rested moments earlier. No one moved. Another bud emerged beside it. Then another. A quiet gasp spread through the gathered witnesses as delicate blossoms slowly unfolded one by one, not all at once, but with patient grace, until every branch carried shimmering flowers that reflected the afternoon sunlight like thousands of tiny stars. The gentle breeze strengthened, lifting silver petals into the air where they drifted peacefully above the crowd before settling across the garden paths, the shoulders of villagers and nobles alike, and finally at Avellini's feet. Tears quietly filled the High Keeper's eyes. "The moon goddess has never measured a person's worth by what they could provide," she said softly. "She has always measured what they chose to become after sorrow entered their lives." No one answered. No one wished to disturb the moment. Alaric slowly stepped forward until he stood beside Avellini beneath the flowering branches. For a long while he simply watched the silver petals fall around her. Finally he spoke, his voice barely louder than the wind moving through the blossoms. "When I first saw you beside the mountain creek," he said, "I believed I had found someone who deserved justice." He looked toward the kingdom stretching beyond the palace walls. "Today I understand something far greater." Avellini turned toward him. Alaric smiled quietly. "You were never the one who needed saving." His eyes returned to the countless people standing silently beneath the blooming tree. "You reminded this kingdom what justice was meant to look like." Another silver blossom drifted gently from the highest branch before coming to rest in Avellini's open hand. She looked down at it for only a moment before lifting her eyes toward the endless mountains beyond the palace. For the first time since leaving Briar Crown, the future no longer felt like something she had lost. It felt like something patiently waiting for her all along. Several peaceful months passed after the gathering beneath the moon tree, and with each changing season, the kingdom quietly began healing alongside Avellini Briarwood. The royal assembly had become part of history, yet its influence reached far beyond the walls of Silver Summit Hall. Under Alaric Ashbourne's direction, every future medical judgment affecting marriage, succession, or inheritance would require independent examination before receiving royal approval. Physicians from every territory gathered to establish new standards, determined that no family would again lose its future because assumptions had been mistaken for truth. Few people called the reforms by their official title. Throughout the villages and mountain towns, they simply became known as Avellini's Promise. Life inside Ashbourne Palace unfolded with a simplicity that surprised nearly everyone. Although servants insisted on preparing every detail for their future queen, Avellini often slipped away before sunrise to help gardeners tend the palace grounds or join village children planting wildflowers along the roads leading toward the capital. She never forgot the kindness strangers had shown when she possessed nothing except a small travel chest and a wounded heart. Alaric never asked her to become someone she was not. If anything, he quietly protected the ordinary parts of her life from the weight of the crown. Whenever advisors suggested grand celebrations or lavish ceremonies in her honor, he answered with the same calm certainty. Respect that must be announced has not yet been earned. Instead, he encouraged schools to teach compassion beside tradition and invited experienced healers like Mother Isolde Rowan to train a new generation of physicians whose first responsibility would always be truth rather than reputation. Ridian often remarked that the palace had become unusually busy since Avellini arrived because ordinary people no longer hesitated to bring their concerns directly before the crown. Alaric merely smiled. Then they finally believe someone will listen. Winter faded gently into spring, and many more peaceful months slipped quietly by before Mother Isolde arrived at the palace for what everyone believed would be another routine visit between old friends. After sharing tea beneath the blooming orchard trees, Avellini accompanied the elderly healer to a small sunlit room overlooking the gardens. The examination was careful, familiar, and unhurried, just as every previous visit had been. When Mother Isolde finished, she remained silent for a moment, her thoughtful eyes resting upon Avellini with unmistakable warmth. Avellini laughed softly. "You have that look again." The older woman reached across the table and gently covered Avellini's hand with her own. "Some blessings," she whispered, "arrive only after people stop believing they deserve them." Avellini searched her face, uncertain whether to hope. Mother Isolde smiled through glistening eyes. "You are expecting a child." The room grew wonderfully still. For several heartbeats, Avellini could neither speak nor move. Memories of Briar Crown returned like distant echoes carried by the wind. The council chamber, the signed agreement, the lonely carriage disappearing beneath cold rain. Those memories no longer possessed the power to wound her. They simply reminded her how far she had traveled. When Alaric entered a few moments later, he found tears resting quietly upon her cheeks. Concern crossed his face until Mother Isolde looked toward him with a knowing smile. Understanding dawned almost immediately. He crossed the room without a word and gently took both of Avellini's hands. Neither of them spoke for several long moments. They did not need to. Some joys were simply too sacred for hurried conversation. News spread gradually across the kingdom, carried more by grateful smiles than official announcements. Maeve Hollis baked enough bread to feed nearly the entire village and insisted everyone take a loaf home. Young Finian proudly declared that the smooth white stone he had once given Avellini had always been lucky. Ridian laughed harder than anyone had heard in years before quietly admitting he had already begun carving a small wooden wolf for the royal nursery. Far away in Briar Crown, Corwin Blackmore often walked alone beside the river where he and Avellini had once imagined the future. The investigation had revealed no great conspiracy, only fear, impatience, and the quiet danger of accepting convenient answers without seeking honest ones. House Blackmore spent the following years rebuilding trust through humble service rather than influence. Corwin never asked Avellini for forgiveness. Some apologies belonged to silence more than words. One warm summer evening, long after the kingdom had settled into peace, Alaric and Avellini carried their infant daughter through the moon grove as golden light faded beyond the western mountains. The ancient silver tree stood quietly beneath the rising moon, its branches moving gently in the evening breeze. Their little girl reached upward with tiny, curious fingers just as a single silver blossom loosened from the highest branch. The petal drifted slowly through the moonlight before settling softly against the child's blanket. She laughed with the effortless joy only children possess. Avellini looked toward Alaric, Her eyes filled not with wonder, but with gratitude. "Do you think she will ever understand everything that happened?" she asked quietly. Alaric watched their daughter smiling beneath the ancient branches before answering. "I hope she grows up in a kingdom where stories like ours sound impossible." Together, they continued walking beneath the silver leaves while distant lanterns began glowing across the hills below. Families gathered around evening tables. Children chased one another through quiet village streets. Somewhere beyond the mountains, another young woman facing an uncertain tomorrow would never know the name of the stranger whose courage had helped change the kingdom she called home. That was enough. Because in the end, Avelini Briarwood was never remembered as the woman who had been traded away. She was remembered as the woman whose quiet strength taught an entire kingdom that truth must always be sought, kindness must never be underestimated, and the greatest legacy any heart can leave behind is not the pain it endured, but the hope it made possible for those who came after.